Humans are fascinated by gore and violence, but even more so the mysterious and unsolved. This interest in disturbing and unpleasant subjects is called morbid curiosity, and it has gripped hundreds of people throughout the ages. I am one of those people. My name is Hallie, and this is the Morbid Curiosity Podcast. Imagine you're on a ship in the middle of the ocean with no land in sight. This alone is enough to make me nervous. It makes me worry that I won't be able to find my way back. But I have no ocean travel experience. The most I've done is fly over it, and even that made me nervous. Mariners and sailors have been able to navigate the landmarkless waves for centuries, and with modern locating technology, it seems impossible for someone that knows what they're doing to get lost. But what if the batteries died, or the satellite signal was lost? A professional sailor might know how to navigate using only a compass, but what if the compass was spinning too? This is a situation that many people fear. There is one location in the Atlantic Ocean where this phenomenon is reported to happen more often than anywhere else in the world. That location is the Bermuda Triangle, and many ships and aircraft crossing it are reported to mysteriously disappear without a trace. The Bermuda Triangle, also called the Devil's Triangle, is a roughly triangular area in the western part of the North Atlantic Ocean, whose 3 points are made up of the southern tip of Florida, the island of Bermuda, and the most eastern point of the island of Puerto Rico. Most of the islands of the Bahamas lie inside the triangle. All of these places are popular tourist and vacation destinations, and sea and air traffic in the triangle is constant and heavy. Although the area is known as the Bermuda Triangle in popular culture, the United States Board on Geographic Names does not recognize its colloquial name. On all maps, the area is just part of the 7th Coast Guard District. Included within the triangle are some of the deepest waters in the world. One of these is the Puerto Rico Trench, a 220-mile-long fissure in the ocean bottom, about 5 miles deep, which lies just north of Puerto Rico. More on that later. It was a 1950 article published in the Miami Herald that christened the area the Bermuda Triangle. This was the era in which the stories of strange and paranormal occurrences in the triangle became well known, but recorded incidents go back much further. The earliest written record of unusual disappearances in the Bermuda area comes from 1502, when an entire Spanish fleet under Francisco de Bobadilla was sunk in a freak hurricane in the sea. In 1800, the USS Pickering was on course from Guadalupe to Delaware and was lost within the triangle with 90 people on board. In 1818, the ship Ellen Austin supposedly came across another ship that was completely derelict and abandoned. They placed a small crew aboard and attempted to sail it back to New York. According to the stories, the derelict ship suddenly disappeared, and then reappeared without the small crew. After a second small crew was placed on the ship, it vanished again, and this time it did not reappear. In 1840, a ship called the Rosalie was found adrift in the waters of the Triangle, with no one on board except for a caged canary. The most famous incident in the Triangle occurred on December 5, 1945. 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bomber planes were carrying out a training flight, Flight 19, over the Atlantic. They set out from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and planned to fly due east for 141 miles, then north for 73, and then back 140 miles to the fort. The flight leader soon reported that his compass wasn't working and proclaimed himself lost somewhere near the Florida Keys. That was the last anyone ever heard from them. Another plane, a Mariner with a 13-man crew, went in search of the planes, but the Mariner was also lost. Half an hour after it went out, a sailor reported an explosion in the sky, but no wreckage was ever recovered. In 1969, 2 keepers of the Great Isaac Lighthouse in Bimini in the Bahamas disappeared and were never found. This is one of the only reports where a disappearance occurred on land within the triangle. In one case, on June 28, 1980, the pilot of a plane flying near Puerto Rico signaled to the Coast Guard radar controller that a weird object was in his flight path, and he was forced to change course. Despite the changes he made, the pilot reported that the object continued to cut him off. Also, his equipment was acting up, and he'd become lost. As the pilot called Mayday, the baffled radar controllers watched as his plane vanished from their scope. Moments later, an unidentified object reappeared on the scope and then flitted away. That night, a search took place, but nothing was found. On Halloween 1991, radar screens that were previously blank showed a single blip. Routine traffic was proceeding undisturbed, but seconds ago, radar had been tracking a Grumman Cougar jet. The pilot and co-pilot were John Verdi and Paul Lucaris, and they were heading to Tallahassee, Florida. Also seconds before, Verdi had requested to fly at a higher altitude to avoid a thunderstorm. He wished to climb to 29,000 feet in order to fly over it. As they were ascending, the blip on the radar that indicated their position disappeared. They didn't answer to any radio calls either. They had not signaled an SOS. They were just gone. A search had to wait until the storm passed, and still no trace of the crash was ever found. In February 2001, Casey Purvis was in his plane doing practice maneuvers with a Coast Guard aircraft. He suddenly reported himself in a fog and then vanished. Weather reports state that the weather was clear that day, with visibility up to 12 miles. In July 2002, another plane mysteriously crashed after taking off from the island of Grand Bahama. It had been in flight long enough to have been halfway to Florida, but its fuselage was found only 15 miles from where it took off. These are just a few of the many stories of ships and aircraft that have vanished in the Bermuda Triangle. In fact, my grandmother-in-law personally knew 2 people who vanished in the triangle. She was kind enough to tell me about them so I could share their stories with you. Both incidents occurred sometime between 1980 and 1990. One of the people she knew was named Jim. He flew a small plane and used it to fly tourists between Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and a small island called Spanish Wells in the Bahamas. While returning from one of these journeys alone, he and his plane disappeared from radar and were never seen again. Search parties were organized, but no wreckage was ever found. A few years later, a woman my grandmother-in-law knew, named Dolly, hired a local man to fly her and her 3 children to Nassau from Harbor Island, both in the Bahamas. All 5 of them disappeared without a trace. In the last 25 years, 75 aircraft and hundreds of pleasure craft had vanished in the waters of the Bermuda Triangle, despite GPS, modern communication devices, and extensive searches. Planes have vanished while in sight of land, while landing, while taking off, and just after taking off. They have vanished within a single sweep of a radar scope, which takes less than 40 seconds. Planes have vanished in shallow waters, even those less than 10 feet deep, leaving no visible wreckage. Many of the last radio communications of the pilots of these planes are also haunting. Some of those recorded include, "Is there any way out of this?" and What's happening to me? Because of all these disappearances, a belief has grown up around the Bermuda Triangle, a belief that the triangle is somehow different than the rest of the sea. Ordinary mishaps such as pilot error, vertigo, loss of fuel, loss of direction, disorientation, or natural disasters can't be the sole culprit. Another strange aspect of the mystery is that many ships and planes have reported unexpected electromagnetic issues in seemingly random locations inside the Bermuda Triangle. But not all of them disappear. It's true that many craft have gone missing in the waters of the Bermuda Triangle, but it's also true that the area is heavily traveled, which raises the likelihood of more accidents. Still, many people who live around the triangle feel that there is something more compelling about these disappearances than just statistical likelihood. The many instances of electronic malfunction, radio dead spots, and compass malfunctions with or without the reported fogs, hazes, or other phenomena contribute to this feeling of something supernatural. This feeling has given rise to some unique theories as to the cause of the many disappearances, such as UFO abductions, a sunken city of Atlantis replenishing its own inhabitants by kidnapping people, or that the lost city radiates electromagnetic forces that throw off our electronics, and of course, sea monsters. Others have said there may be a time-space dimensional rift in the triangle, with ships disappearing into other dimensions. Still others take a more scientific, but still fantastic approach and blame atmospheric eddies, gravity sink, reverse gravity fields, and micro wormholes. On the other side of things, the United States Coast Guard states that the number of ships that sink in the area is not unusual for the amount of traffic that goes through it. In fact, the U.S. Coast Guard is officially skeptical of any paranormal activity in the Bermuda Triangle. They also collect and publish their reports, most of which contradict many of the tales written about the triangle, and flat out disprove many of those that claim no trace was left after a ship sank. Government bodies are not the only skeptics. Larry Cush, author of the 1975 book The Bermuda Triangle Mystery Solved, argued that many claims written about the Bermuda Triangle were exaggerated and unverifiable. His research uncovered a number of inaccuracies and inconsistencies in the statements from eyewitnesses, victims, and other people involved in the incidents. Cush also uncovered cases where important information was not reported. One such case was that of Donald Crowhurst. Donald Crowhurst was a businessman who set sail from London on October 31, 1968, in a triple-hulled boat with the intention of sailing solo around the world. Though he was a relatively inexperienced sailor, Crowhurst was backed by a demanding investor and hired an aggressive publicist to spread the news of his journey. Unfortunately, Crowhurst got off to a slow start, and his boat was plagued with problems. Instead of turning back, he reported that all was well. When Crowhurst finally began his journey home after floating around the Atlantic, he found out his closest competitor had sunk. Fearing that the truth about his deceptions would be discovered, Crowhurst apparently jumped overboard with his fraudulent logbook and drowned himself. The boat was found abandoned in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle on July 1969, with the last entry of his accurate logbook dated July 29th. Author Charles Burritts, who's known for his book on the mysteries of the Triangle, presented Crowhurst's story as a mystery, despite evidence that proved Crowhurst had lied and then killed himself. Cush revealed this fabrication, and also argued that a large percentage of the incidents attributed to the Triangle actually occurred outside it. While doing research for this episode, I also found this to be the case. Other skeptical researchers, such as Ernest Taves and Barry Singer, have highlighted the fact that stories of the paranormal are popular and profitable, which leads to the creation of large amounts of pro-paranormal material on the Bermuda Triangle, much of which is misleading and inaccurate. Again, I can attest as well that any in-depth research into the Bermuda Triangle weakens the argument that the paranormal is involved, and many stories have been exaggerated. For example, the story of the Ellen Austen, which I shared earlier. A simple check with Lloyd's of London, who keep a historic register of ships and their travel records, proved the existence of the Ellen Austen. However, there are no casualty listings for this vessel, and no mention of a derelict vessel that later disappeared. Another example of exaggeration involves the mariner that went missing while searching for the missing Flight 19 bombers. Not mentioned by most of the online sources or authors is that the Mariner plane had a history of explosions due to vapor leaks when it was heavily loaded with fuel. The Mariner that went searching for the Flight 19 bombers would have been fully loaded with fuel when it flew out over a vast ocean looking for survivors. Also, a tanker off the coast of Florida reported seeing an explosion. Many authors mention this explosion, but leave out the part where the tanker that saw the explosion observed a widespread oil slick when it searched for survivors. This is evidence of a crash. There are details about Flight 19 itself that aren't mentioned, and these include that the leader of the mission, though an experienced pilot, was not familiar with the coastline he was flying along. He may have mistaken the Bahamas for the Florida Keys and reported his position incorrectly. Another issue that's hardly ever mentioned is the fact that humans are prone to error and fear, and panic and fear have a tendency to take over when suddenly there is no land in sight, especially with people who are unfamiliar with the area they are traveling through. Pilots and ship's captains may become disoriented, mistrust their instrumentation, and truly become lost, perhaps even abandon their ships without apparent reason. Heat haze in summer can also disguise the position of the horizon, causing more confusion. Confusion can cause a person to make irrational decisions. The mind tells you one thing, and the instruments tell you something else. It can make a person think their instruments aren't functioning correctly. The mind is a powerful thing, especially when it goes awry. The stories of paranormal occurrences in the Triangle may be just that, stories. But that doesn't make it any less fun to talk about. Just remember that fact often lies buried under rumor and exaggeration, and research is the only way to reveal the truth. The sea in the area of the Bermuda Triangle is actually quite dangerous without UFOs or time-space vortices. The Gulf Stream, a major surface current, flows through the Straits of Florida into the North Atlantic, passing through the Bermuda Triangle. This current is basically a river within the ocean. Its flow is forceful at around 2.5 meters per second, or 5.6 miles an hour. And it can and does carry floating objects with it. A small plane making a water landing or a boat having engine trouble can easily be carried away from its reported position by the current. Violent weather is also known to the area. Tropical cyclones, powerful storms that form in tropical waters, have historically taken thousands of lives and caused billions of dollars in damage. These cyclones are more than likely what sunk Francisco de Bobadilla's fleet. Hurricanes also occur. Atlantic hurricanes are born on the African coast, feeding on warm air and moisture. They often head for America and veer off toward the area of the Bermuda Triangle. At the National Hurricane Center in Miami, meteorologist Jim Busheen researches these hurricanes and states that there are more hurricanes in the Bermuda area than anywhere else in the Atlantic. Thunderstorms occur there too, sometimes more than one at a time. Sometimes these storms produce microbursts, which are small downdrafts that move in an opposite way to a tornado, spiraling downward and spreading out in all directions once they hit the ground or sea. A powerful cold microburst was most likely the cause of another sinking in 1986. The crew of the Pride of Baltimore, a reproduction of a 19th century schooner, felt the wind suddenly shift and increase velocity. These downbursts can happen during unstable weather conditions, and according to Bushin, can hit the surface like a bomb, exploding outward like a giant squall line of wind and water. A similar event occurred in 2010 off the coast of Brazil, when the Concordia, a steel-hulled barkentine, was hit by one of these so-called air bombs. The USS Cyclops was a cargo bulk carrier that was transporting manganese in 1918. It entered the deep waters in the Triangle and vanished. No trace was ever recovered. Wild theories grew up around the incident because of this lack of evidence. People thought it had been taken over and turned into a pirate ship, or taken out by a German submarine, eaten by a giant squid or other sea monster. It's more likely that the ship, with its flat bottom and tendency to roll in large swells, was hit by what is called a rogue wave. Thought to be a thing of legend, people have reported rogue waves, huge random walls of water, throughout history, but they have never been officially documented until more recently. Experimental research conducted at Plymouth University Coast Laboratory Wave Tank in the UK has simulated the conditions of the Bermuda Triangle in search of answers. Oceanographers have tested whether a rogue wave could sink a ship like the Cyclops by generating a large wave, similar to one that may form when two storm fronts converge. The wave they created sunk a scale model of the Cyclops in a matter of seconds, so it's possible that's what caused it to vanish so suddenly. Another possible explanation for the disappearances is the strange presence of large fields of methane hydrates, a form of natural gas that have formed on the continental shelves of the ocean bottom. These fields resemble a milky, waxy material, and one deposit can cover a huge area. Methane hydrates form from organic material such as dead fish, seaweed, and other plant life that sink down from the surface and lie on the ocean floor, and then degrade through microbial decay. Methane from this process of decay becomes trapped in pockets on the sea floor. These methane hydrate deposits have been hit by floating oil rigs, causing a huge bubble of methane to burst up and surround the rig. Bubbles decrease the density of water and cause heavy objects like ships or oil rigs to lose buoyancy. It has been hypothesized that if such a thing occurred around a ship, it would sink very rapidly and without warning. However, according to publications by the U.S. Geological Survey, no large releases of gas hydrates are believed to have occurred in the Bermuda Triangle for the past 1,500 years. Still, it's possible this type of event has sunken ships in the past. Other natural dangers in the triangle include waterspouts, tornadoes that move up out of the sea, or rotating columns of air that drop from thunderstorms. Open water waterspouts are deadly, especially at night when visibility is low. They can flip a vessel, and if they are high enough velocity, they may not even be visible. If a ship gets stuck in one, there's nothing they can do. Most of the shipwrecks in the triangle occur around the island of Bermuda itself. Centuries ago, explorers avoided the island, calling it the Island of Devils because of the sound of screams and other strange noises that came from it, and because their ships would wreck if they tried to approach. Later, when the island was colonized, the noise was found to be the call of a rare bird. Sonar technology was used to map the ocean bottom surrounding Bermuda, revealing the terrain around it. Bermuda is very much like an underwater mesa. The islands were created during an ancient volcanic eruption. The volcano eventually went extinct, and over the centuries, wind and rain eroded the volcanic mountains to a flat plateau. Then the sea rose to its modern levels and created the island we know today. Because the flat plateau surrounding the island is shallow and more sunlight shows through the water, reefs grew up around it. These reefs are deadly to shipping on their own, but what's living on them is more treacherous. Locally, they are called boilers or breakers. They are a rocky algae mixed with the shells of tiny mollusks. Together they make a hard limestone crust that rises up from the seabed. They are hard as rock and lie just below the surface of the water. Their sharp points can pierce the hulls of ships like a can opener. They are at their deadliest in calm water, as waves make them visible to the naked eye. These are the cause of most of the shipwrecks around Bermuda. In 1864, the Mary Celestia, a paddle-wheeled steamer and not the more famous ghost ship that was seen in the Azores near Portugal, left Bermuda for North Carolina. As the paddleboat made its way up the south end of Bermuda, it struck a breaker and sunk, taking only its captain with it. This wreck lies still today in only 55 feet of water off the southern coast of the island. Google has actually mapped the wreck of the Mary Celestia in Google Street View. It's pretty neat, and I definitely recommend checking it out. Among the deep waters of the Bermuda Triangle is the Puerto Rico Trench. The trench lies north of Puerto Rico, and it's the deepest point in the Atlantic Ocean at a depth of about 5.4 miles. The trench sits at the site of a transform fault line, meaning the place where two tectonic plates shift against one another. Researchers are trying to map the entire trench, and one of the ways they've started this process is with a specialized camera called a drop cam. Once this camera makes the hour-and-a-half journey to the bottom, it transmits images back to the surface. Through this camera, we now have a window to an unexplored region of the ocean. Scientific studies of the fault zone in the trench have shown that if an earthquake occurred in the trench, it could generate a significant tsunami. It would be similar to the earthquake in the Sumatra Trench, which caused the 2004 Sumatra earthquake and tsunami. If the Puerto Rico Trench suffered a severe enough earthquake, a tsunami could hit the east coast of North America and possibly even Europe. The east coast of North America is home to several nuclear power stations. If a tsunami hit the east coast, several nuclear disasters along the lines of the Fukushima nuclear disaster of 2011 could occur. Fukushima is still recovering from that incident and will be for years to come. The odds of a quake on this scale in the Puerto Rico Trench, as evaluated by Yuri S. Ten Brink, a geological survey scientist, are small, but the capability is there. Brink also states that an earthquake could trigger a methane hydrate release. Brink and his team have deployed remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, to scan the trench with sonar and assess the threat level. Their scans revealed that the trench is prime underwater landslide terrain. An underwater landslide would also cause a tsunami, not as big as the Sumatra tsunami, but it would cause massive damage all the same to the cities on the east coast of North America and, of course, the islands all around it and the Caribbean. There are several interesting and dangerous features in the ocean bottom around the Bahamas as well. An abyssal plain surrounds the islands. An abyssal plain is an underwater plain on the deep ocean floor. They are among the flattest, smoothest, and least explored regions on Earth, and though they appear to be desert-like, they are home to a wide variety of microbial life. A strong current runs through the abyssal plain of the Bahamas. Any wreckage on the bottom for more than a few years would be thoroughly broken up and dispersed. Because of this, any wrecks that may have landed here will likely never be found, especially a plane that broke up on impact. The Bahamas are also home to ancient tales of underwater beasts that consume people and entire ships. The fascinating truth behind these legends lies in deep underwater cenotes, or blue holes, deep marine caves or sinkholes open to the surface that form a bank or island. The Bahamas are an archipelago sitting on top of an underwater limestone plateau called the Great Bahama Bank. The cliffs that surround this plateau are taller than any on dry land, taller even than those that surround the Grand Canyon. Close to the island shoreline, these blue holes look like circular voids that extend hundreds of feet into the earth. Blue holes developed over thousands of years. In the Ice Age, the sea levels were lower, and therefore much of the limestone of the Bahamas was above ground. Over the centuries, rain eroded large voids in the rock, and eventually the ceiling caved in. As the sea levels rose, these bottle-shaped caverns filled up with water and created blue holes. One of the supernatural tales told about the Bahamas is that a monster called the Lusca lives in one of these blue holes, and the bubbles that sometimes come up from its depths are signs of the Lusca's breathing. The legends tell of ships being sucked down into the blue holes when the Lusca inhales. Whirlpools occur in Dean's Blue Hole, one of these limestone caverns on the Bahamas' Long Island. The reason for these whirlpools is not a sea monster, but tides. Researchers have explored many blue holes and have revealed that there are currents that flow through side tunnels inside the caverns. These run with the tides and are very strong, as the current must flow through fissures and tunnels, which creates suction. This flow also creates circular motion in the water, which in turn creates visible whirlpools on the surface. The Bahamas Air-Sea Rescue Association deal with most of the incidents in the Bahamas. They report that most disappearances, be it planes or ships, are due to human error. One representative stated that it's easy to die out there on the sea when there is no help, especially when there are so many ways to be killed. It's true we might never know what happened, but it wasn't paranormal. The sea itself seems the most logical explanation for the disappearances. The expanse of ocean in the Bermuda Triangle is home to fast-flowing currents, hidden reefs, large underwater sinkholes, underwater carpets of methane hydrate, unpredictable weather, and an environment most humans have never experienced. I believe that in order to find and understand the truth, the area of the Bermuda Triangle must be scientifically studied. Its currents, its ecology, and the behaviors of the sea in that specific location. Even in the 21st century, the ocean remains mostly unexplored. The sea is a huge part of the gravitational force that holds our planet together and gives the land and its inhabitants life. We forget as a people that we don't fully understand the forces involved in rotation and revolution of our Earth and its magnetic field, and that we have not explored every inch of our own planet. We forget as a people that we don't fully understand the forces involved in the rotation and revolution of the Earth, its magnetic field, and the fact that we have not explored every inch of our own planet. This is why preserving our environment is so important. We will never know the truth if we destroy all the evidence by polluting our world. I'd like to share one last mystery before I wrap up this episode. During a very low-frequency radio test conducted by the U.S. Coast Guard and the U.S. Navy in the 1950s, sounds that are best described as whispers and whistles were picked up when listening out over the ocean. What created the sounds is unknown. My first thought is whales, but I have no expertise of any sort in radio frequency or the distance whale songs can travel. Whatever the case, these sounds can be picked up over the ocean still today. The mysterious disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle remain mysterious, whether they are due to something paranormal or the unpredictable wrath of the sea. Most of the thousands of people who enter the triangle leave it without issue. Still, many disappearances occur every year to this day. The not knowing, the lack of solution, is what stirs our curiosity. The Morbid Curiosity podcast was produced by H. Lloyd. If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a morbid topic for me to talk about, you can tweet the show at Morbid Podcast or find us on Facebook and Instagram at Morbid Curiosity Podcast. If you like the show, please share us on social media and give us a rating on iTunes. Your shares and ratings help us grow our creepy community. Another way you can support the show is by going to our new website, www.morbidcuriositypodcast.com. Links to all our social media can be found there, as well as a list of our latest episodes. Thank you for all your support. My name is Hallie, and until next time, thank you for listening.